Welcome to Today in History, our channel, where we dive daily into the most fascinating, weird, and mind-blowing events that have happened throughout time. In addition to our daily videos, we also delve into the lesser-known aspects of history, exploring the events and actions that have shaped our world. Today, we're tackling a topic that has sparked much debate and misinformation over the years: the claim that the Irish were the first slaves brought to the Americas. It's a narrative that's often circulated in discussions about history, but how accurate is it? The truth is far more complex, and today we're diving deep into the historical realities, myths, and misunderstandings surrounding the Irish experience in the Americas. So get ready to uncover a hidden chapter of history that's often misunderstood: the origins of the Irish slave narrative. To understand where the claim that the Irish were the first slaves in America comes from, we need to go back to the 17th century, a period of significant upheaval for Ireland. The English conquest of Ireland, particularly under Oliver Cromwell, led to widespread devastation, with many Irish people being dispossessed of their lands and livelihoods. During this time, thousands of Irish were forcibly transported to the Caribbean in American colonies, but it's crucial to distinguish between different forms of servitude. The term slave is often used interchangeably with indentured servant when discussing the Irish experience. But these two conditions were very different. Indentured servitude was a system where individuals worked for a specific number of years in exchange for passage to the New World, room and board. While the conditions were harsh and sometimes brutal, it was not the same as the chattel slavery that African slaves endured. Chattel slavery was a lifelong inheritable condition where individuals were considered property with no legal rights or possibility of freedom. Indentured servants, on the other hand, were legally recognized as persons, and while many faced severe exploitation, they were theoretically entitled to freedom after fulfilling their contract. The transportation of the Irish to the Americas. The transportation of Irish people to the Americas began in earnest during the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland in the mid-1600s. After Cromwell's forces defeated the Irish Confederacy, many Irish were captured and forcibly sent to the colonies, particularly to Barbados, where they were put to work on plantations. This period saw a significant number of Irish, particularly women and children, sent to the West Indies under coercive circumstances. However, it is important to clarify that these individuals were not slaves in the same way African slaves were. They were indentured servants, meaning they were bound to labor for a set period, typically between 4 to 10 years, after which they could theoretically gain their freedom. While the conditions were undoubtedly harsh, with high mortality rates and poor treatment, indentured servitude was a contractual arrangement, unlike slavery, which was perpetual and hereditary. The conflation of Irish indentured servitude with African chattel slavery has often been used to downplay the horrors of slavery or to draw false equivalences between the experiences of the Irish and African slaves. While both groups suffered tremendously, their experiences were fundamentally different in terms of legal status, social mobility, and the nature of their bondage. Before we move into the next chapter, we would like to ask you for a favor. If you are enjoying the video, please support us by subscribing to our channel, click the like button, and share the video. It means a lot to us. Thank you. The reality of indentured servitude. Indentured servitude was a common practice in the 17th and 18th centuries, not only for the Irish, but also for many English, Scots, and Germans. People from these regions entered into contracts of servitude, either voluntarily or under duress, to escape poverty, religious persecution, or political unrest. For the Irish, particularly after Cromwell's conquest, many had little choice. Those who were not outright captured were often lured with promises of land and opportunity in the New World, promises that often went unfulfilled. Upon arrival, they found themselves in harsh conditions, working long hours in extreme heat on sugar or tobacco plantations. The treatment of indentured servants varied. While some were able to fulfill their contracts and secure land or freedom, many others succumbed to disease, overwork, or abuse. The mortality rate for indentured servants in the Caribbean was particularly high, with many dying before they could complete their terms. It is also worth noting that some indentured servants were subjected to extensions of their contracts, either through legal manipulation or as punishment for alleged misdeeds, prolonging their servitude well beyond the original agreement. However, unlike African slaves, they had a legal avenue, albeit a difficult one, to challenge such injustices. Myths and misconceptions. The narrative that the Irish were the first slaves in America has been perpetuated by various groups, often for political reasons. In some cases, it has been used to diminish the unique suffering of African slaves by suggesting that the Irish experienced the same or even worse conditions. This is not only historically inaccurate, but also diminishes the experiences of both groups by conflating two very different forms of exploitation. The Irish slaves myth gained particular traction in the 1990s and 2000s, partly due to the spread of misinformation on the internet. Misleading articles and memes have circulated widely, claiming that Irish slaves were treated worse than African slaves, or that they were the true forgotten victims of American history. These claims are often based on selective readings of historical documents, out-of-context quotations, or outright fabrications. Historians have pushed back against these myths, emphasizing the importance of understanding the distinct differences between indentured servitude and chattel slavery. While the Irish did suffer greatly under English colonial rule, and many endured severe hardships in the Americas, their experiences were not equivalent to the systematic dehumanization and brutality of African slavery. The legacy of the Irish in America. Despite the hardships faced by Irish indentured servants, many eventually gained their freedom and became part of the broader colonial society. Some even managed to acquire land and rise to positions of influence within the colonies. The Irish contributed significantly to the development of America, particularly in the labor-intensive industries like construction, agriculture, and infrastructure. As the years went on, the descendants of these early Irish immigrants became a vital part of the fabric of American society. During the 19th century, a new wave of Irish immigrants arrived in the United States, fleeing the Great Famine. Unlike their 17th century counterparts, these Irish immigrants were largely free and quickly established vibrant communities in cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Over time, the Irish became one of the most prominent ethnic groups in America, playing key roles in politics, labor movements, and cultural development. Figures like John F. Kennedy, the first Irish Catholic president of the United States, symbolize the profound impact that the Irish have had on American history. Why the distinction matters. Understanding the difference between indentured servitude and chattel slavery is crucial for several reasons. Firstly, it helps to preserve the historical accuracy of both the Irish and African American experiences. The exploitation and suffering of African slaves should not be minimized by inaccurate comparisons, just as the real struggles of the Irish should not be exaggerated to fit a particular narrative. Secondly, this distinction allows us to better understand the complexities of colonial history. The Irish, like many other groups, were caught in the broader dynamics of English colonialism, which sought to exploit labor from across the British Isles and beyond. By recognizing the nuances of this history, we can more accurately appreciate the varied experiences of different groups within the colonial system. Finally, addressing these myths head-on helps to combat the spread of misinformation, which can be used to justify modern-day prejudices or to distort historical realities for political ends. Accurate historical knowledge is a powerful tool in the fight against bigotry and ignorance, and it is vital that we strive to get the facts right. The broader context of colonial exploitation. It's important to situate the Irish experience within the broader context of colonial exploitation. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the British Empire was expanding rapidly, and the demand for labor in the colonies was enormous. This labor was sourced from various groups, including Africans, indigenous peoples, and European indentured servants. The use of indentured servants was widespread, particularly in the early years of colonization, when African slaves were not yet the dominant labor force. Over time, however, as the transatlantic slave trade grew, African slaves became the primary labor force in many colonies, particularly in the Caribbean and the southern United States. The shift from indentured servitude to chattel slavery was driven by economic factors. African slaves were seen as a more profitable and stable labor force, as they were enslaved for life and their children inherited their status. This transition had profound implications for the social and economic structures of the colonies, entrenching racial hierarchies and leading to the systemic oppression of African Americans that persisted for centuries. The Irish, while they faced significant hardships, were ultimately able to escape this system and integrate into colonial society in ways that African slaves could not. Understanding this distinction is key to understanding the different trajectories of these groups in American history. Setting the record straight. So were the Irish the first slaves in America? The short answer is no, but the story is more complex than that. The Irish did suffer greatly under English rule, and many endured harsh conditions as indentured servants in the Americas. However, their experiences were not equivalent to the brutal and dehumanizing institution of chattel slavery that African slaves endured. It's important to acknowledge the suffering of all groups within the context of colonial exploitation, but it's equally important to avoid conflating distinct experiences. The myth of Irish slavery can be harmful when used to downplay the horrors of African slavery or to create false equivalences. By understanding the true nature of Irish indentured servitude and its place in the broader history of the Americas, we can better appreciate the complexities of colonial history and the varied experiences of those who lived through it. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's continue exploring history with an open mind and a commitment to the truth. Understanding the past helps us shape a better future. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.